My son-in-law shoved me into the kitchen counter hard enough that my hip caught the edge and I bit the inside of my cheek. I tasted blood before I even understood what had happened. The next morning, I drove to his office and handed him a manila envelope. He grabbed it before I finished my sentence, grinning like he'd already won something. "Finally, Dad," he said. "Knew you'd come around." He didn't open it right away. Kept talking, kept smiling. Then he pulled out the papers. The grin dissolved so completely, so fast, it was like watching someone turn off a light. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years doing estimating work for a mid-sized construction company out of Barrie, Ontario. My wife, Diane, died of ovarian cancer in the fall of 2021. 19 months of treatment, and she never once complained in front of our daughter. That's who Diane was. Quiet courage dressed up as ordinary stubbornness. My daughter Claire is 31. She married her husband Marcus in the summer of 2019 at a venue near Georgian Bay that cost more than my first car. I helped pay for it. Didn't mind. You don't mind things like that when your kid is happy. For the first year, Marcus seemed decent enough. He ran a small property management company, 3 residential buildings in Barrie, a 4th he was supposedly acquiring. He had a firm handshake and strong opinions about everything from hockey to interest rates. Diane said there was something behind his eyes she didn't trust. I told her she was being protective. I was wrong. She was being perceptive. The first loan request came 8 months after the wedding. Marcus needed $22,000 for roof repairs on one of his buildings. Emergency situation, insurance dispute, cash flow problem. Could I help out, just until the claim settled? He sat at my kitchen table with a folder full of documents that looked official enough. I wrote the check. He shook my hand. That was November 2019. The claim apparently never settled. By the following spring, he needed another $15,000 for what he called operating costs. I asked about the 22. He said it was wrapped up in the insurance dispute. Said as soon as it cleared, he'd pay everything back at once with interest. I wrote another check. Diane was in her second round of chemo by then. My attention was elsewhere. I think Marcus knew that. By the time she died, I'd given him just over $51,000. I had the bank records. I had every check stub organized in a folder in my filing cabinet, the same way I'd organized project budgets for 3 decades. Marcus knew that too. Didn't seem to bother him. The requests stopped for about 6 months after Diane passed. Then they started again. Smaller, more casual. Could I spot him $4,000 for a licensing renewal? A quick $3,000 for an accountant's bill that came in late? I started saying no, politely at first, then more clearly. Each time I said no, Marcus found a way to pull Claire into it. "Dad, we're really stretched right now. Dad, is just until the building starts generating again. Dad, Marcus is trying so hard. I want to be clear about something. I never blamed Claire. She loved her husband. She believed what he told her. That's not weakness. That's what trust looks like before someone decides to exploit it." The Saturday in March, when everything changed, Claire and Marcus had driven up to my place for what Claire called a family lunch. I'd made soup, tomato, from scratch, the way Diane used to. We were standing in the kitchen when Marcus said he needed to talk to me about something serious. He wanted $60,000, not a loan this time, an investment. He was putting together a syndicate to purchase a commercial property in Innisfil. He needed my retirement savings as anchor capital. He had a PowerPoint presentation on his laptop, projected returns, 5-year timeline, conservative estimates. I told him no. He asked me to look at the numbers first. I told him I'd seen his numbers before. The kitchen went quiet. Claire set down her spoon. Marcus leaned against the counter across from me and his voice changed, the way a person's voice changes when they've been performing patients for a long time and they're done performing. He said I was selfish, that I'd been sitting on money Diane would have wanted used for the family, that Claire deserved better than watching her father hoard savings while they struggled. I said they weren't struggling. His buildings were generating income. I'd seen the numbers on those too. That's when he shoved me, both hands flat against my chest. I went back into the counter edge, hip first. The bowl of soup I'd been holding hit the floor. Claire screamed his name. He told her I'd been disrespecting him for years and she needed to stop defending me. I straightened up, tested my weight, said nothing, walked to the front door and held it open. Marcus grabbed his jacket, told me I was making a mistake, that I was old and alone and would regret this. Claire looked back at me from the doorway, her face doing something complicated I couldn't quite read. The door closed. I cleaned up the soup, put the bowl in the sink, sat down at the kitchen table, and stayed there for a while. My hip ached. My cheek was still raw where I'd bitten it. Then I went to the filing cabinet. I called my brother-in-law Frank that evening. Diane's younger brother. He's a retired OPP officer, works part-time as a security consultant in Sudbury now. I told him what happened. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "You got the check stubs." I told him I had everything. He said, "Good. Don't talk to Marcus. Don't call Claire tonight. Call a lawyer tomorrow morning." I called Renata Osborne. I'd met her through the company I used to work for. She handled a contract dispute for us in 2017. Smart, no patience for nonsense. She picked up on the second ring, which surprised me until I remembered it was a weekday and it was 9 in the morning, and she was probably already 2 coffees in. I told her what happened. She said, "Do you have documentation of the loans?" I said yes. She said, "Do you have any witnesses to the assault?" I said I didn't think so. She said, "Do you have any recordings?" I said I didn't know. She told me to check every device in my house before I did anything else. I had a video doorbell, one of those Ring units my son Derek had installed the previous fall after a package got stolen off my porch. I'd forgotten it was there. I opened the app on my phone, found the event from Saturday afternoon, played it back. The angle was partial, but you could see through the kitchen window behind me. Not perfectly, enough. You could see Marcus's hands come up. You could see me go back. You could hear Claire's voice. I watched it 4 times. Sent it to Renata. She called back 20 minutes later. "It's not perfect," she said, "but it's something." Combined with the financial documentation and any physical evidence of injury, we have grounds for a police report and potentially civil action for the loan amounts. She paused. "Silas, he shoved you in your own home and told you regret it. I want you to take this seriously." I told her I was taking it very seriously. I went to the walk-in clinic in town that afternoon, not because I thought anything was broken, but because Renata said I needed documentation. The physician on duty noted the bruising on my hip, asked how it happened, wrote up a report when I told her, photographed it. Professional, matter of fact. She'd probably done it before. Frank drove down from Sudbury 2 days later. He sat at my kitchen table and looked through everything I had. Bank records, check stubs, text messages, the timeline I'd written out by hand at 2 in the morning. He flipped through it the way he used to look at case files, slowly, not missing anything. When he was done, he said, "He's been doing this systematically. This isn't impulse. This is a pattern." I asked him what he meant. Frank pulled out his own folder. He had a friend still active in financial investigations. Nothing formal, just background. Marcus had been named in a small claims action in Collingwood in 2018, before he met Claire. A former business partner. $10,000, disputed investment, never recovered. Marcus had settled out of court for $3,000. The partner had signed something to stay quiet. One prior incident, not enough to prove a pattern on its own. But it was a thread. I told Renata. She got quiet in the particular way that means she's thinking fast. The police report went in on a Thursday. Constable who took it was professional and careful. She asked detailed questions. Wrote everything down. Said they'd follow up. I didn't ask for a specific outcome. I just wanted it documented. 3 days later, Renata called me with news I hadn't prepared for. The former business partner from Collingwood, his name was Peter, had reached out to the OPP investigator handling my case. Apparently, when the assault report hit a certain database, it flagged something related to his old case. He'd been waiting, he said, waiting for someone else to go first. Peter and Marcus had co-signed on a renovation project in 2017. Peter had put in $45,000. Marcus had moved the money through a numbered company and into accounts Peter couldn't trace. When Peter confronted him, Marcus had grabbed him by the collar and pushed him into a door hard enough to split his eyebrow. Peter had gone to a lawyer. The lawyer had said it was his word against Marcus's. No witnesses, no video. He'd taken the settlement and signed the NDA and gone home and tried to forget about it. I shouldn't have stayed quiet, Peter told the investigator apparently. I knew he'd do it again. NDAs don't prohibit testimony in criminal proceedings. Peter knew that now. He was willing to testify. Renata called it a pattern of behavior, said it would matter significantly in how a judge assessed the case. I should tell you where Claire was in all of this. She called me the night after the incident, when I was still in the kitchen, not turning on the lights. She was upset. She said Marcus had told her I'd been threatening to cut off financial support, and that he'd only reacted because I'd made comments about her. I told her that wasn't what happened. She said she didn't know who to believe. I asked her if she thought I would lie about something like this. She said she didn't know what she thought. That was the hardest conversation. Harder than the shove. Harder than the bruise. Her husband had been feeding her a version of events for 3 years, and I didn't fully understand how complete that version was until that phone call. I didn't push. I just said, "When you're ready to talk, I'm here. Not to convince you of anything, just to talk." She hung up without responding. Marcus sent me a text message 4 days after the police report. He'd apparently been told one had been filed. The text was brief. "Drop this, and we can sort everything out. Keep going, and you'll regret it. I know people in this town, Doug. My name is not Doug." He meant to write Dad. I think he was agitated. Either way, Renata took a screenshot and added it to the file. Over the next 3 weeks, I drove to Collingwood once to meet Peter at a Tim Hortons near Highway 26. He was in his late 40s, quiet, brought documents in a clear plastic folder. He was careful with his words, the way people are when they've rehearsed something many times and are still afraid of getting it wrong. He showed me his bank statements, the NDA, medical record from the emergency visit for his eyebrow. His hands didn't shake, but he held his coffee too tight. "He targets people who trust family," Peter said, "or people who want to be helpful. He finds the opening and works it." I asked him why he was willing to risk the NDA, risk a lawsuit, risk everything. He said his teenage daughter had recently gotten engaged. He said the thought of someone like Marcus near his family made him physically sick. I understood that completely. The court date was set for early May. Provincial offenses and summary conviction proceedings in Barrie. Renata walked me through what to expect. Clinical, efficient, honest. She told me the video was helpful but not conclusive on its own. She told me Peter's testimony was valuable, but the defense would attack the NDA angle. She told me our strongest asset was documentation, the pattern, the money, the text message, the medical report. I made one mistake. My neighbor Rod, who I've known for 15 years, heard through someone that I'd filed charges. He called me, asked me what happened, expressed outrage. I told him more than I should have. Not because I was emotional, just because Rod and I talk about things. 2 days later, Marcus apparently had a rough summary of what our case looked like. Renata was not impressed. She pointed out carefully but clearly that I had effectively handed the other side a preview. She said I needed to stop talking to anyone outside the legal circle until it was over. I told her she was right. She said she knew she was right. Claire reached out 3 weeks before the court date. A text, not a call. She said she'd been going through some bank records. She said she had questions. I asked her to come over. She sat at the same kitchen table where she'd eaten soup that last Saturday. She had her phone and a notebook. She pulled 3 years of joint account statements and cross-referenced them against Marcus's claimed business expenses. She'd found 17 transactions she couldn't account for, totaling just over $28,000. She'd done this herself, on her own time. Without me asking, I put the folder of check stubs in front of her. She went through it without speaking. I made tea. Let her take the time she needed. At one point, she stopped at the statement from November 2019, the first 22,000, and pressed her fingers flat against the page like she was trying to feel the paper. She sat like that for a while. Then she said, "He told me you volunteered this, that you'd offered because you wanted to help us get started." I said no. I said he asked. I said I had the records going back to the original request. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I want to talk to your lawyer." Renata met with Claire the following week. I wasn't in the room. Claire had questions I couldn't answer, about what the proceedings meant, about what her options were, about what happened if she wanted to separate. Renata answered what she could and referred her to a family lawyer for the rest. Claire came out of that meeting different, not lighter, Exactly. More resolved. Like someone who'd been trying to balance on one foot for a long time and had finally just put both feet down. The morning of the court date, I wore the same jacket I'd worn to Diane's memorial service. Not for any superstitious reason. It's just a good jacket, and it fit right. Renata met me outside the courthouse on Mulcaster Street at 8:40. She had coffee in a paper cup, which she offered me. I took it. We didn't need to review anything. We'd reviewed everything 3 times already. The courtroom was small and functional. Provincial court. No jury. Judge Marchand was in her mid-50s, reading glasses on. Expression neutral. Marcus sat with his defense counsel across the room. He didn't look at me when I came in. He studied the table. The Crown presented the video evidence first. It played on a screen. Partial view, kitchen window. You could see the contact. You could hear Claire. It was about 40 seconds long, and the courtroom was very quiet while it played. Medical documentation next. Physician's report. Photographs of the bruising. The defense tried to suggest I'd sustained the injury some other way. The Crown pointed out that I'd reported it within 36 hours and the injury was consistent with impact against a sharp counter-edge. Peter testified, calm, specific, factual. The defense challenged the NDA. The Crown cited the criminal testimony exception. The defense pushed. Peter didn't waver. He'd been waiting 3 years to say these things in a room where they would be recorded. Then the Crown said there was one additional witness. Claire walked to the stand in her work clothes. She'd come from a morning shift at the dental practice where she's an office manager. She looked like she hadn't slept. She also looked like she'd made a decision she wasn't going to unmake. She described what happened in the kitchen, accurately and completely. The Crown asked her if she'd had any reason to hesitate before coming forward. She said yes. The Crown asked what changed her mind. She said, my mother would have wanted me to. Marcus's lawyer objected. The objection was overruled. The defense cross-examined her, tried to suggest she was influenced by me, by the upcoming divorce proceedings, by financial motives. Claire answered each question with the same flat, precise, calm. At one point, the defense lawyer asked if she had any doubt about what she saw. Claire said, no, I was standing 4 feet away. Marcus said nothing during the proceedings. He stared at the table. Judge Marchand took about 40 minutes. She noted the video evidence was partial but corroborating. She noted the medical documentation was consistent and timely. She noted Peter's testimony established a pattern. She noted the complainant's daughter had provided direct eyewitness testimony without any demonstrated motive to fabricate. She found Marcus guilty of assault. Sentencing. 12-month conditional discharge, 200 hours community service, mandatory anger management, and a no-contact order for 1 year. Restitution hearing to follow regarding the financial amounts. He was not led out in handcuffs. He walked out with his lawyer, not looking at anyone. I sat still for a moment after the room started moving again. Renata put her hand briefly on my arm. Said, good result. I said, yeah. Neither of us said anything else right away. In the hallway, Claire was leaning against the wall near the windows. She looked exhausted. I walked over. We didn't hug. We stood beside each other, looking out at Barry in the pale May light. She said, is it over? I said, the criminal part is. She said she knew. She had a family lawyer now. She'd filed for separation the previous week. I asked how she was doing. She thought about it. Said, I don't know yet. I keep waiting to feel something clear, and it just doesn't come clear. I told her that was normal, that it didn't have to come clear right away. She said, did you know? Did you suspect before it got bad? I said no. I said her mother had. I told her about the comment Diane had made 3 years ago. About something behind his eyes. Claire put her hand over her mouth for a second. Then she took it away and looked back out the window. She said, she never told me. I said, she was protecting you. That's who she was. We stood there for a while longer. The sun was out, which felt slightly wrong, the way good weather sometimes does when things are difficult. The restitution hearing came 6 weeks later. I put together a claim for 37,000 of the 51 amounts I could document clearly with contemporaneous records. The remaining 14 was harder to trace, and Renata advised against overreaching. Judges respond better to precision than ambition. Marcus's business had collapsed by then. 2 of his 3 buildings had been sold under financial pressure. His lawyer argued limited ability to pay. The judge ordered a structured repayment of $22,000 over 4 years with conditions, not the full amount. Not nothing. I didn't feel satisfied exactly. Satisfaction implies something got restored. What you get from a process like this isn't restoration. It's more like a door closing. You look at the closed door, and you're glad it's closed, and you feel the weight of everything that went through it before it shut. That's different from satisfied. Peter sent me an email the week after the sentencing. Short. Said he'd been sleeping better. Said his daughter's engagement party was in August. Said thank you. I called Frank on the Sunday after everything wrapped up. Told him the outcome. He said, good. Then he said, Diane would have handled this better. I said, Diane would have seen it coming. He laughed. So did I. It felt okay to laugh. Claire comes for dinner most Sundays now. She's living in a rented place on the south side of Barrie while the separation proceedings move through. She doesn't talk about Marcus much. When she does, she's factual about it, the way you talk about something that happened, not something that's happening. She's seeing a therapist. She goes for runs in the morning. Small things, building something back up. I've been going to the clinic for the follow-up my doctor recommended. Nothing serious. Just things that accumulate at 64 that you ignore because you're busy with other things, and then you remember you should stop ignoring. The soup bowl I dropped the day Marcus shoved me has a chip in the rim now. I kept it. It's back in the cabinet with the others. You can't tell unless you look closely. Some Sunday mornings I have coffee at the kitchen table where all of this started, and I think about the fact that Diane knew, that she saw something and held it quietly, and kept loving Claire anyway, and kept being kind to Marcus anyway, because she didn't want to make Claire choose. That kind of restraint costs something. I think it cost her more than she let on. I also think about the fact that she never got to see how it ended. I don't know if that's better or worse. I go back and forth on it, depending on the light. There's a chipped soup bowl in my cabinet that I keep meaning to replace and never do. I look at it sometimes on Sunday mornings when I'm making coffee, and Claire is still asleep upstairs, and I think about how much can hinge on a single ordinary afternoon. A pot of tomato soup, a request I'd heard too many times, a pair of hands that decided a no wasn't something they were willing to accept. Marcus didn't shove me because he lost his temper. That's the thing I've come to understand clearly. People with bad tempers snap and then feel shame. What he did was calculated. He'd been testing limits for 3 years. Every loan request a little more entitled than the last. Every guilt trip a little better aimed. The shove was just the moment he decided the test was over and he'd found the edge of what I'd tolerate. He was wrong about where that edge was. What I've learned, and what cost me more than I expected to pay, is that decency can be mistaken for weakness by people who've never tried to be decent themselves. I was patient because I believed in giving people room to grow. Marcus read that patience is surrender. There's nothing wrong with my patience. There was something wrong with my assumption that everyone operates from the same basic honesty I try to bring to things. Peter understood this before I did. He'd been quietly carrying the weight of staying silent for 3 years because he thought the cost of speaking was too high. What he didn't account for, what neither of us fully accounted for, is that silence has its own cost. Every month he stayed quiet, Marcus was out there finding someone new. My wife, as it turned out, my daughter's uncle. People who trusted the word family because they'd never been given reason not to. Claire figured it out herself. That matters to me more than the verdict. She sat at that kitchen table with her bank statements and a notebook, and she did the arithmetic that nobody asked her to do, and she came to me, not because I pushed her, because she's honest, because somewhere underneath, everything Marcus had layered over her these past few years, she still had the clear-eyed instinct to follow a thread until it told her the truth. That kind of integrity doesn't come from circumstance. It's built, slowly, over a whole life of small choices. I made mistakes through all of this. The conversation with Rod, moving too fast, saying too much. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. 64 years old, and I still let frustration override judgment at the exact moment it mattered most. But I stayed in it. That's what I keep coming back to. When Renata told me the case was weaker without the neighbor's testimony, I stayed in it. When Marcus filed the counter notice and Claire wasn't speaking to me, I stayed in it. Not out of stubbornness, out of the understanding that walking away would have meant letting him keep going. Another family, somewhere. Another person who trusted the word family too easily. Diane would have seen all of this coming and said nothing, and loved everyone through it anyway, because that was her way. I'm not built the same. I needed it to get worse before I understood it clearly enough to act. I'm not sure that makes me worse than her. Just different. We all find our threshold. The ball stays in the cabinet. Some things you keep not because they're useful, but because they remind you of the exact moment something changed, and you need to remember that moment, so you don't drift back into thinking it couldn't happen again.